I think that we are recording right now. Okay, Andy Williams. I'm talking with Andy Williamson. Andy, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Mike. I'm Andy Williamson. I'm a researcher, consultant. I do work around digital engagement, e-participation, digital democracy, community informatics. Based in the UK, but my background is in New Zealand, Australia, and also work in Europe.
Okay, and so give me a bit of your perspective on the relationship between community informatics and policy making, both in terms of how it contributes to policy and how policy contributes to community informatics.
Well, they're two very interesting questions and probably require quite different answers. Let's start with how policy contributes to community informatics. One of the big problems with CI projects is it's around funding and momentum. Most of the projects that get off the ground do so because there's someone in the locality that's interested in doing something and someone else there who's got the skills to make it happen. Now, that's the recipe for a startup. It's not a recipe for a sustainable, growing project. So if you're going to get sustainability and scale on a lot of community projects, you've somehow at some point got to get in some sort of structures and funding to make them happen, and hopefully also to learn from what other people are doing and to share what you're doing. So policy can really help there. If you've got a policy, and the example I'll use is the New Zealand Connecting Communities strategy and subsequent ones through the digital strategy, which actually looked at how you engaged communities and the community technology experts and projects and linked them together, funded them, and shared. That's really vital, because otherwise you've just got pockets of isolation, awful lot of reinvention of the wheel, and an awful lot of failure, very high attrition rate. So if you turn it around, what does community informatics do for policy? One of the things that happens in a traditional policy cycle is, in terms of the public, nothing. There's a small window in the policy cycle which is called consultation, and it happens in varying degrees, often less rather than more, and often it's very difficult for communities to participate in that because quite often it's done in central places, in government ministries. It's not devolved out, it's very inaccessible, it uses a language that people don't understand, and I don't want this because I don't want it is not an appropriate policy response. So it also requires a set of skills and knowledge that's very difficult for the average individual to engage with. So where community informatics and community-based and social media projects are really handy is trying to gather people together and connect up the people with the passion and the interest with those that have got the policy skills and those that are affected by the policy issues. From a policymaker's point of view, one of the things that social media does for policy making is it allows policymakers to listen in a way they've never been able to before. That's really important. So if you start thinking about how it transforms the policy cycle, it's really exciting because it transforms it from a largely closed process into a much more receptive and open process. And community informatics is a real underpinning of that way of getting the community voice collected, amplified, and responded to. It's about closing the circle. It's about listening and responding as well as just creating the spaces for conversation.
What about technology? Do you have any thoughts on how the technology enables these processes, or how it, or specific kinds of technologies that are specifically useful in this context?
I think there's a project just kicked off in the UK listing some of the tools you can use for engagement, and I think it lists about 64. So there are certainly useful technologies, but the thing is they don't all work in all places. So it's about having a good armory of tools. So for example, you might choose to use a wiki if you want some kind of collaborative document writing, a collaborative policy process. But that wouldn't work very well if you were trying to do very contentious engagement. You need to do something that's much more hands-on and mediated. The main thing about technology is recognizing that you have got a number of things at play. I mean, I'm not a great fan of technology for the sake of technology. too often people do things online because they can, which is always the wrong way. It's about getting the right tool and recognizing that technology is always going to be the tool, but it's only a tool. So it's about how you align the technology with the appropriate processes and the frameworks around engagement, consultation, and around community development. So anything that makes it easier is always good. You know, you're never going to use technology to increase an individual's motivation to take part in a democratic process. But what you can do is use technology to lower the barrier to engagement. And so the point at which you have to be motivated to take part is a lot lower. In terms of picking one technology, we've got to look at mobile. We've really got to see a shift towards mobile, particularly for engaging young people.
And in terms of the first question, that is how policy can enable communities, the community use of technology, and also the empowerment of communities. Do you have any? Do you want to talk about any specific examples that you're say talk about the effect of the policy in New Zealand?
Well, I think the New Zealand policy is interesting, although you have to talk about it in a historical context, because since there was a change of government a few years ago, that policy is effectively void. Yeah. It's certainly not being carried out to the extent that it was intended to be. But the aim of the policy in New Zealand, built around the digital strategy, was really quite simple. It was based on an assumption that government didn't know best, and that the people that know best about their own problems are the people living with them. So if you want to empower communities to come up with solutions, don't parachute them in. Let the communities come up with the ideas and then resource them to implement those ideas. Create pathways for sharing, create opportunities. Most of all, what's most important is create opportunities to make those projects sustainable. Now, you can really only do that at a policy level, because those are macro issues. You've got to accept that those are linked into wider societal and therefore policy issues. You know, anything we did in New Zealand around community informatics was linked to the three policy pillars within the government at the time when that work was set up, and that was national identity, economic development, and families young and old. So anything you did around a community informatics strategy was going to be linked to one or more of those, and you could actually relate it from an operational project, you know, people in a community doing something, right through to a national economic strategy or a national social strategy. I think that's really, really important, because it gives you something to measure against, because you know what you're measuring. It gives you a big picture, because you don't want to be just doing random projects. There is an element for allowing sort of random innovative projects to emerge, but ultimately you have to decide if that's a good use of public funding as well. So policy, in a way, becomes the critical part that holds everything together. But there is a huge flaw in all of this, because we've got a policy level, which is policy works at a really big picture. And policy strategy is all big picture stuff. We've got a lot of projects that happen on the ground. What's often missing is the tactical stuff that links them together. I think what New Zealand started to do very well around the digital strategy was build some of those tactical lines down from the strategy, digging down into, well, okay, what does this mean? And then how does this link to an operational on-the-ground project? And that's not been done particularly well elsewhere.
And who owns that, the tactics in that? Is it a shared thing between the policy level and the community?
There are two answers to this. There's the ideal answer that I think should be, which is that I think all of these projects should be a conversation, and that these projects work better when they're collaborative. I don't believe in at a democratic level. I don't believe in the model of democracy where it is the citizens out to get the government and the government doing to the citizens. Those models are just old world and don't work. They're just mired in all sorts of complications, and primarily in a sense of distrust and democratic alienation, which is what we see in most Western countries. So personally, I would like to see those projects done as collaborative works where community, government and other third parties as roles. NGOs, as roles for academics, where they can come in and get involved. But in reality, what happens is it's often top down.
Right.
You know, there's a great model of what we could.
Okay. Well, that's great, Andy. Thank you. And it's just on 10 minutes, and that's fantastic. It was exactly what I was looking for. So thank you.
That's great.
Yeah, I hope our paths will cross again sometime fairly soon.
Yeah, well, I hope we'll see you in London if you're going to be here. That'd be great.
Well, my daughter's moving there, so I think the likelihood that we'll be going is pretty great. But yeah. So, and if you're ever in this part of the world,
yeah, it would be nice. I haven't been over that way for a while.
Yeah. Okay, take care. I've got to rush off. So, thanks a lot, Andy.
Okay.
I really appreciate it.
Cheers, Mike.
Okay,
Talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.